Hello. Like a lot of people, I have been quite stressed following the shifting tides of news about the current US elections, but a wonderful temporary distraction from all of that is different publications have been bringing out their best books of the year lists, and I always really enjoy browsing through these lists of books to see what I've read, what I haven't read, and what books I might not even have heard of before. And just a few days ago, Publishers Weekly brought out their best books of the year lists. So I have it up here on their website, and it's great to see author Percival Everett there on the cover. Now, they have many different categories of books, and their editors have selected 150 books across all of these categories. I'm not going to talk about all of them because that would take far too long, but I will go through their top 10 and also their top fiction choices to discuss if I have any thoughts about the books that I've read, and give summaries of the other books and whether I'm interested in reading them or not. Of course, this is a US publication, and I live here in London in the UK, so some of these books might not have come out here, which might be partly why I've not heard of them before. But I'd love to hear if you have read any of these books, and if you would also recommend them, if you agree with their choices, or if there are other books that you want to highlight as the best books of the year. So to start off with their top 10, which includes books of all different genres, and the very first book is All Fours by Miranda July, which is a novel about a semi-successful artist who declares to her family that she is going on a cross-country trip, but then she very quickly gets diverted from that, and so it's a story that's looking at aging and mortality and creativity and desire. And if you've ever read Miranda July before, you'll probably know that there's a bit of like weirdness and absurdity mixed in with her narrative style. My favorite story about Miranda July, since she's a filmmaker as well as a writer and an artist, I spoke to someone who worked on publicity for one of her films once, and when a new film of hers came out, and she was going around doing interviews about it with different journalists, and this person from publicity was accompanying her, and as they were going out to one interview, Miranda July just stopped and said, "Wait, what are we doing here?" And the publicity person said, "Oh, well, we're about to go on this interview to talk about your new film." And Miranda July responded, "No, I mean, what are we doing here?" And as in, what are we doing in this world? And so the publicity person was like, can we hold off on the big existential questions and just get to this interview? Because we don't have time to go into all of this. And I just found that so funny, and kind of makes me love Miranda July, but also makes me realize I would never want to work with her professionally. But I've heard very mixed things about this novel, All Fours, where some readers have told me they found it quite disappointing and slight, and but obviously some critics and authors really revere what she's doing here, because it's a National Book Award finalist, and all of that, and it's been cited as some of the best books of the year. So it is one that I still want to get to reading. The Book of Love by Kelly Link. This is a novel about 3 dead teenagers who get to come back to life and are reckoning with their pasts and with issues to do with love and family and relationships. And Kelly Link is an author I've always meant to read. She's, I think, mainly known more for short stories, but this is her working at a novel, and by all accounts, it's very successful. By the Fire We Carry, the generations-long battle for justice on Native Land by Rebecca Nagle. This is a nonfiction book looking at various legal cases across time regarding Native American rights and dispossession, from treaty negotiations to courtroom dramas, and what all of these legal cases say about Indigenous life life in the US. The Heart That Fed, A Father, a Son, and the Long Shadow of War by Sciacchitano. This is a graphic nonfiction narrative where the author looks at his father's life and his military service during the Vietnam War and the PTSD which resulted from that. So it sounds like a very moving and creative way to look at this family history and historical detail, but to bring into that the relationship between a father and a son. Herscht 07769 by Laszlo Krasznahorkai. This is a Hungarian novel about a man who is very gentle but who has a learning disability, and he's taken advantage of and exploited by a neo-Nazi gang leader. So it looks at these issues to do with conspiracy theories and nationalism, and it's written in quite a challenging way in that it's a 400-page novel that's a single sentence, but I think it sounds absolutely fascinating, and I'm really eager to read this. James by Percival Everett, certainly one of my favorite books of the year, where Everett relates the events of the adventures of Huckleberry Finn, but from the character of Jim's perspective. And of course, in Twain's story, there are many sections where Jim isn't there, so we find out what happens to him and what he's thinking about in these intervening periods. And it's so moving and funny and powerful what Everett does with this classic American story. I love that there's a map in the very beginning. And something I think that's really striking about the book that I keep thinking about is in the very beginning, there's a section of the notebook of the founder of the very first minstrel troupe. And then this plays into the story later on in the book when Jim becomes involved in this minstrel troupe and what that says about his sense of identity and the self-consciousness that he constantly feels. And so that's one aspect of the many things that Everett does in this story that I think is so extraordinary. And of course, you don't need to have read Twain's book before reading this book. Readers often ask that, though I think it does help a lot to be familiar with that, or to at least go read a summary of that novel before then diving into this new book. And another one of my favorite books from this year, My Friends by Hisham Matar. Both this and James were on the Booker Prize long list. Sadly, this did not make the short list, but I think this is an absolutely extraordinary novel about a Libyan man named Khalid who comes to study in the UK, and while he's in London finds himself caught in a very violent conflict, and so following the consequences of that and how subsequently he is exiled from his homeland for his entire life, and he's caught in this temporary existence, and the way Matar follows his story, how this intersects with real historical events, and how it follows his relationships with a number of different people and the different choices they make, and how this relates to their own sense of national identity and the lives that they independently want to build for themselves. And it's another book with a map on the inside cover. Survival is a Promise, The Eternal Life of Audre Lorde by Alexis Pauline Gumbs. This is a biography of the great author Audre Lorde, and not necessarily following a chronological portrait of her life, which is something I always have an issue with in biographies, in that it can slightly drag a bit if you start at the very beginning of the central figure's life, following past generations of their family, and well, I just want to get to the work that they did. And so it's looking at her feminist work and her authorship, but also her relationships, her mentorships, but also her romantic relationships. And a couple years ago, I read Zami by Audre Lorde, which I thought was absolutely extraordinary. I loved it so much, and so I'd love to read more and find out more about Audre Lorde's life through this book. Then there is another biography, Traveling on the Path of Joni Mitchell by Ann Powers, and this is looking at the life of the great musician, the many different phases of her music life, her many influences and obsessions, how she had many different musical selves, and sometimes the inconsistencies and gaps between these. So I've always enjoyed Joni Mitchell's music, though I've never been, kind of like a hardcore fan. But my husband is a big fan of hers, so this might be a good Christmas gift for him. And finally, on this top 10 list is When the Clock Broke, Con Men, Conspiracies, and How America Cracked Up in the Early 1990s by John Ganz. And this is a nonfiction book. I'm looking at the 1992 US election and certain right-wing politics of that time and how it was kind of leaning into authoritarian posturing and how this can be seen as like influencing the politics of today. So very topical that this book is on this list on this day that I'm talking about it. So this sounds like a really interesting and important read, but depending on how things go this week, I might need to stay away from it for a while, or maybe it would be good to embrace it and read about it to really better understand why we are where we are. Next, I'm going to look at the books on their fiction list. I mean, obviously we've had some fiction already, but I guess these are their top 20 other fiction books. So first there is The Anthropologists, and this is about a young couple who are settling down in a new place, and one of the couple is a documentarian, and so they look around the neighborhood where they want to settle down, almost like an anthropologist, and gathering information about the habits and customs of the people in this neighborhood and the functioning of it, and through this they're kind of negotiating what they need to leave behind from their previous life and then what they need to find in this new one. So this is a book that I hadn't come across before, but it sounds really interesting. The Coin. This is a novel about a Palestinian woman in exile in New York City who teaches at a school for underprivileged boys, and between meditating on her past experiences in early life and the country she left behind and the stresses of her present-day existence, she feels on edge all the time, and she deals with this by obsessively cleaning. I don't know if it's just the description of teaching at a school for underprivileged boys, but this gives me vibes of like Dangerous Minds, or even an earlier film called Up the Down Staircase, starring Sandy Dennis, who's a favorite actress of mine. It probably just isn't anything like those, but it sounds really interesting. Fury. This is a Mexican novel that I've been really keen to get to. It's a story of the desert and various people who find themselves astray and kind of lost in this desert, especially two soldiers from opposing sides who abandon their fighting to come together, and they form a relationship together, but also following a number of different people that they encounter in the desert. And so this was written by a poet, so I think the language and style of it is meant to be quite lyrical and beautiful, as well as looking at really like hard issues and really complicated characters. It's difficult for me to say the title of this novel without giggling, but it's God Bless You, Otis Spunkmeyer. This is about a black man in Philadelphia who's an ex-army grad student who is also a paramedic working in an emergency emergency room, and it follows his life and day through all of the people that come into this emergency room. So it sounds quite like a harrowing story, but it's meant to be written in a very creative and vibrant way. The title of the next book is also the title of a very famous Victorian novel, obviously, and which the author was obviously playing on a bit, called Great Expectations, which follows a man who is working on the campaign for a senator who wants to become America's first black president, and following the excitement of that, but the massive challenges surrounding it as well, and also how like politics is so much kind of like theater, and the author worked for Obama back in 2008, so probably has a lot of insight into this. Intermezzo by Sally Rooney. Now, at the very beginning of this article, they ask the questions, Marxist purveyor of literary smut, overrated romance author. It feels like whenever anybody discusses a new Sally Rooney book, immediately launch into like asking what side of the discourse surrounding Sally Rooney do readers fall under, and I find this like quite frustrating, and I think they're quite frustrated by it as well, but it seems to be something that is just always talked about, when really I think readers should just try one of her books and read it and experience it, and you might really get on with it, or you might not, and that is totally fine. But I really enjoyed and appreciated this book about two Irish brothers who are quite distanced in age from each other, and their father has died recently. So it's following their grief, but also the complicated relationships they have with women, and following those women's lives as well. But it mainly, like I'd say, like 70% of or 75% of the book like centers around these two men and following their stories, but also the many extended conversations they have with each other and the tension between them. But their conversations they have with the women that they're having relationships with as well. And one of the striking things I really remember about this book, or that I keep thinking about, is how the younger brother, he had some very dodgy opinions when he was in his teenage years, and his much older brother relates to him still as if those were still his opinions when he has moved on from those. And so I think Sally Rooney is looking at this issue, especially like in the social media age, where people might have posted things online like a decade ago, but that are still haunting them today, and they're still being held to account to them today, even though their opinions might have changed. So it asks a lot of really interesting modern questions like this, and I just found it so enjoyable to read. Lazarus Man. This is a novel about a 5-story tenement house in Harlem which collapses, and about the consequences of this disaster and the people connected to it, the survivors, how a man is pulled from the rubble and then takes his survival as a kind of like religious mission that he then follows. Old King. This is about the tensions between a conservationist and a logger in Montana in the 1970s, and an ancient tree that is called Old King, but also about a reclusive hermit who gets involved in some really extremist action. So this is meant to be quite a thrilling and tense story. Then there's the novel that I just started reading, Our Evenings by Alan Hollinghurst, and I'm reading this with my online book club this month. So if you're not part of my book club, but you're interested in joining and discussing this book with us, then I'll put a link in the description below. But this novel follows a mixed race gay man over 4 decades in England as he becomes an actor, his struggles with acting, but also his long-term friendship with a boy he first met at school, and the very striking differences between them. So like with all Hollinghurst's work, he really delicately like explores characters and scenes over a long period of time, and sort of builds up these sequences of relationships and people's positions in the world. So I'm really enjoying it so far and just getting into the whole mood of it. Pink Slime. This is a Uruguayan novel about a mysterious plague that besets a city and how a new algae bloom poisons the air, and how a corporation, the only food that they can produce is this disgusting pink slime. And so it's following this very dramatic and kind of environmental dystopian story, and I think it sounds fascinating, so I'm eager to get a copy of this book. Another novel dealing with potential environmental catastrophe, but also the history of colonialism, is Praiseworthy, which follows an Aboriginal town in Australia and one family in particular who are wrestling with all of these big issues, and they're very different responses to them. And I've heard amazing things about this book that is very long. So it's one that I just haven't found time for yet, but that I really want to. Another book that I keep hearing about and I really want to read, but it's difficult for me to get a copy of because it's not published here in the UK, is Rejection, which is a book of interconnected short stories about a range of characters who are dealing with rejection on different levels, both in their personal and professional life, and to do with their relationships. And so it's looking at issues to do with like identity and sex and internet and dating apps. And I've heard it's quite a severe book, that one that you really have to like brace yourself for, but it's one that, yeah, I'm just really compelled by. Sister Deborah. This is a novel about a Rwandan girl's interactions with a missionary healer and how this raises issues to do with colonialism and religion and the roles of women. Small Rain by Garth Greenwell, and this novel follows a poet who's largely lived in his mind, but then he's struck with a tremendous pain and a physical ailment, which takes him to the hospital, and following his struggle with the US medical care system and trying to figure out what is going wrong with his body. So I loved Greenwell's debut novel, What Belongs to You, and I've been wanting to read more by him, and this sounds like a really interesting new story from him. Someone Like Us. This is a novel about an Ethiopian American journalist who tries to start a new life for himself with his wife in Paris. And I've heard that if you're a fan of unreliable narrators, then this is a book for you, because it pieces together the story of his past, but like through his point of view, and the reader naturally questions over time what should be believed and what shouldn't be believed. The Spoiled Heart. This is a novel about a man with a complicated past, and because of that he throws himself into political life and campaigns to become the Secretary General of his local union, but finds himself coming into conflict with the other person who is campaigning for this role. So I've really enjoyed Sanjeev Sahot's books in the past and been wanting to read more by him. His writing is just beautiful, and he has this great degree of like psychological insight that builds up to tremendous emotion. A Sunny Place for Shady People. This is a proof of the UK cover, which I really like, but I also like the US cover. So this is a collection of surreal and supernatural Argentinian stories about ghosts and body horror, but also looks at real life issues like intergenerational trauma and family rejection and relationships. So I've enjoyed reading Enriquez's fiction in the past, but there's always like something about it which is just never quite fully clicks for me, or I never feel quite fully emotionally invested in it, but it is really creative what she does in her fiction. This strange, eventful history, which is a family saga that's told in such a unique way, as it follows a French-Algerian family from the midst of World War II up until close to the present, and following various members of this family as they move around the world and form relationships and take on new jobs, and as it follows their experience, it creates this really interesting portrait about like lineage and family and the meaning of family, and I found it so poignant and powerful. I know not everyone got on with this book and the style of how it relates this family story, but I found it so striking and original with many memorable scenes in it. Wild Houses. This is a really thrilling story as it follows a teenage boy who's kidnapped by members of a gang because his older brother owes this gang drug money, and so they hold him hostage at a man's house who's not connected to any of this, and finds himself kind of caught up in the middle of it. So we follow a number of different characters' perspectives as this very gripping story unfolds, but also the way that Barrett writes about these characters' psychologies is just so beautiful and really like gets at the heart of their being. And I had a very special experience reading this because I was traveling around Ireland at the time that I was reading it, and it's set in County Mayo, and so it really brought this story alive for me. But yeah, I really enjoyed this debut novel by this very talented author. And finally, there is Your Absence is Darkness, which is an Icelandic saga about a town in Iceland and a man who has lost his memory, and as he tries to piece it together, the story and the history of this location and the members of this community unfolds. So this sounds like a really wondrous and atmospheric tale. Those are all of the books on the top 10 list and their top fiction choices. So thank you for browsing through these lists with me. And like I said, let me know if you've read any of these books and if you would also recommend them, or if you have other books that you want to recommend to me. But I hope you're doing well and reading good things and finding some peace of mind in these hectic times. And I will speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.